Welcome to the Unit Economics Podcast. I'm Josh Stabinsky. On today's episode, I sit down with Lil Tuffy, a San Francisco-based poster artist who spent more than 2 decades designing and handprinting concert posters. His path into poster design started almost accidentally. After leaving the tech world and getting involved in the San Francisco music scene, he began making posters for shows around the city. What started as creating unsolicited posters for small venues gradually evolved into a full-time practice, eventually leading to work with legendary artists like Neil Young, Willie Nelson, and many others. In this conversation, we talk about how the economics of concert posters actually work, from setting print runs to how revenue from poster sales is split between artists, bands, and venues. We also get into the logistics of screen printing, the timeline from design to finished poster, and how the role of concert posters has evolved from promotional material into collectible merchandise. Finally, we talk about his work with the Poster Institute, a nonprofit organization that supports poster artists around the world through events, exhibitions, and community building within the gig poster scene. For those of you who don't know, I've been collecting concert posters for over 15 years now. Tuffy is genuinely one of my favorite artists, and I feel so lucky to have been able to bring him on the show. I learned so much during our conversation, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. Tuffy, thank you so much for taking the time to do this today. If you wouldn't mind just starting with a brief background on yourself, that would be great.
Yeah, I started designing posters in 2002, started bartending and booking bands at a local bar. So I created a poster for my birthday show, and that led to a couple jobs at a couple of other venues and working with a couple other local artists, one of them being the Firehouse, who was kind of like my idol at the time. So they brought me into their studio. They let me do a few jobs with them, threw me the keys and said, "We're heading to Europe. The studio's yours for the next month and a half." And that's kind of how I got my start.
Where was this geographically, too, just to set the context?
This is all in San Francisco. Yeah.
And for context, too, just to set the stage of like the scale at this point, what was the venue that you were creating the print for? The very first one.
The first print I made was for a bar called the Parkside in San Francisco. Like I said, it was my birthday, and the band was just a small duo from Ohio called the Black Keys. And it was so early in their career that I think there were more people there for my birthday than there was to see them.
That's unbelievable. Yeah, I was fully expecting it to be a band that I'd never heard of. I love their like early blues stuff, so that's pretty wild. So, what was the first gig you booked where you felt like, wow, this is real, this is really happening?
It all happened kind of by accident. I never planned to do this. I didn't know this was something I could do. I had just left the tech world. I never really particularly enjoyed working in that industry, and I'd always wanted to work in the music industry. So I started kind of bartending, learning how to bartend and booking bands, and still trying to figure out a way to kind of figure out where I fit into the music industry. I started doing stuff for the Parkside, Bottom of the Hill, and a couple other smaller venues around San Francisco. But pretty quickly, through the Firehouse guys, Chuck Sperry, Ron Donovan, I was getting other connections. And between them and having bands sleep on my couch over the years, I had kind of made some friends and connections that way. So I was getting some pretty decent jobs above my pay grade. So I think in less than a year after I started, I did a poster for CBGB's 30th anniversary. And I mean, that was just a huge honor. I was blown away with the opportunity to do that. Flew to New York City and went to that show with the Dictators. And it was a really good time in San Francisco as well. Like the garage rock resurgence was happening. That was kind of the genre that I wanted to work in. So it provided me a lot of opportunity and a lot of exposure to a lot of bands.
Also, for context for listeners, what was your background in art growing up? Like, how much printmaking experience, how much experience in the arts did you have leading up to all of this?
Yeah, in high school, I was very connected to the arts. I was in AP art classes, and I planned to go to art or design school. Graduated a semester early and interned at a design agency in Cincinnati. And then I went to Carnegie Mellon for graphic design. Because I had already worked in the design industry for a year, a lot of it was kind of repetitive. And I ended up transferring into the fine arts department. And I did a lot of like video and early computer-based art, as well as like metalworking, sculpture, installation artwork. And when I graduated, it was right when the dot-com thing started to happen. So the timing was really interesting. It was like right when websites started to show up in television ads and on billboards and things like that. So it was very early. I ended up working for a financial company, so it was very dry material and not what I wanted to work on. But that company got bought by another company. I eventually got transferred to San Francisco, and I'd already kind of made the decision to move here for the music scene. So that worked out pretty well. And then in 2000, I left the corporate world. I started freelancing, and the dot-com boom bust happened. And I switched over to bartending and working with bands and stuff like that. So none of it was planned. I didn't know this was a job, but it happened pretty quickly. And next thing I know, I was traveling around the United States and within a couple of years around the world with it.
Yeah, it's incredible. Okay, can you walk me through what the typical process is for commissioning a work? Is it a venue that reaches out to you and says, "Hey, this band is in town?" Is it the band itself that reaches out to you? How does the process actually work from the onset?
Yeah, the process of an individual poster has changed a lot since I started doing it in the early 2000s. It was still the Wild West. The Firehouse guys had a reputation already established, and I was kind of riding their coattails. And I would basically just like, if there was a show coming to town, I'd say, "Oh, I'm going to do a poster for this show," not tell anyone. Show up at the venue with a pile of posters, sell them, give some to the band, give the band some money, and move on. Over the next couple of years in the early 2000s, that model started to change. Permissions needed to be given. So I would cold call bands that were coming to town and see who they wanted to work with. And in the last 10 or 15 years, it's become its own industry. And posters, instead of promotion or something before the show, is now more a memento or merchandise. So the role of the poster, how they're made or done, has completely changed since I started doing this. Now I'm really lucky and people approach me. So whether it's a merchandising company, a band's management, and bands of all levels too, from really small mom and pop venue type stuff to, worldwide touring bands as well.
What does the process look like? Let's say, name your band. They reach out to you. How much freedom and control do you have over the actual art that you're creating? And how much back and forth is there with them in that process?
Yeah, the design process and the control over the image, my role and my opinion in that was really important to me when I started doing this, having come from a corporate background, and especially a financial background. Like I said, it was very stiff and very tight guardrails. So I really wanted to have everything be my vision and what I wanted to be. So I was pretty lucky, and for the most part, I was granted that. A few times someone would hit me up and give me some really strange art direction. Like, I'm trying to remember an early one. It was for like a swing revival band coming to San Francisco, and the art director from the venue wanted me to do the Transamerica Pyramid swing dancing with the Bay Bridge. And I kind of like rubbed my head. I'm like, have you looked at what I do? Like, that's not my style. I'm not that kind of illustrator, and I don't think I'm the best fit for this job. And 20 something years ago, that would happen fairly occasionally. And I think today I've refined enough styles that I could probably do something like that. But like I said, most of what I do, I want it to be my interpretation of what that is. At the same time, I try to be intentional about it and make it relevant to the band, what their current aesthetic is. I don't want people to look at the poster and say, "That's a Lil Tuffy poster." I want them to look at it and have them say, "Oh, that's relevant to that band. That define, it's their look, it's their style, it makes sense." Both of those things can exist. And I think in a lot of cases they do. I think people can identify when something I have done based on my typography style, my limited color palette, maybe negative space or some sort of retro referencing. But I don't want to have just one style and do it over and over and again. I want to keep pushing myself forward. I want to keep doing new things. So that's very important to me when I work with a band. I typically have them pick out a few of my posters that they like. So it gives me a jumping off point. And then I'll ask them if there's something that they don't want that I should just definitely avoid. If they're sick of hearts or skulls or motorcycles or whatever it is, literal translations of a band name, sometimes that's a very lazy way of approaching something, but sometimes it works really well. Sometimes I have that city right behind me because I'd use it as an example of what not to do. Yeah, I don't know. It's been very important for me to be in charge of what I make. And that's given me a lot of satisfaction. I think that's the reason I've been able to stick with this for so long. Having that confidence in what my style is and what my eye for something is, I think has helped define who I am.
Yeah, absolutely. How long does it take from the point at which you've finalized the actual art, the actual design for a poster, to getting it printed and delivered to a venue in instances when you're selling it at a venue? How much lead time do you typically have to start? And then how long does it actually take to, I guess, go back and forth, finalize the design, print it, get it in hand? Like, what does that entire timeline look like?
The timeline for me is typically pretty quick. I'm kind of the person in everyone's call book when someone drops the ball or they forget to do something and it's the last minute. I mean, I've had stuff that's like less than 24 hours to get done. I usually like a little bit more time, but I designed a poster yesterday. I've been working on it for about 3 days. I got approval last night. I'm printing it right after we get off this today, and I'll deliver it tomorrow. So,
Wow.
a week is a typical time, whether it's a rush week or, months in advance. I think because I work simply, it makes it, and I don't know. And I just, after years of practice, you can make something pretty quickly. I finished that design yesterday and it's kind of like a roughed up, kind of raw image of something. It's a Valentine's Day thing. And I sent it to my friend when I finished. I'm like, oh God, I can't believe I just spent like 4 days on this. And it looks so shitty, but on purpose. So I made a sticker a couple of years ago that says, "It ain't pretty being easy." And I think that's kind of defines a lot of my aesthetic. Like when you make something intentionally look raw and
Mhm.
like it wasn't made on a computer, it can take a little bit longer than it would be to just do something cleanly.
Yeah, makes sense. How does the process of setting a print run work? Does the band dictate how many editions, how many physical prints will be made? Do you determine what the edition number will be, like the literal print run? Like who defines that?
Yeah, every job is a little bit different. So it also depends on the client. I could work for the venue, the promoter, the merchandising company directly with the band or my own just self initiated projects. So there's a pretty standard number. Typically, 100 is a good number to go off of. 50 is my minimum. So if I'm doing less than that, it's not really economically feasible for me to set it up and hand print it and take that kind of time. And then my main client is a local promoter and every run for them is 200 posters. And I get a percentage of that. They get a percentage of that. The band gets a percentage. And then touring bands that use them as merchandise, they have a pretty decent idea of what they're going to sell based on the venue size, ticket sales, things like that. You don't usually make a poster for something unless it's close to selling out and there's like going to be a demand for it. But yeah, all of it's contingent on needs and costs and things like that. The amount of colors I'm using for the poster and all that kind of stuff.
Do you have a maximum run size?
Yeah, because I hand print stuff, there is a limit to how much my body can take. About 200 is about the most I want to do on an average weekly basis for a single poster run. I have done 400 or 800 and it's just absolutely miserable. So once I start getting into larger run sizes, I'll farm that out to another local printer, or sometimes the band has their own printer they've already contracted with, and that makes things a little bit easier.
I have a selfish question, and I don't know if I'm going to keep this in here or not, but now I'm really curious. I have a print of yours from a series of 3 Neil Young shows from a couple years
Mm.
ago, and I feel like the print, like, it was, like, numbered to 3 or 7. It was, like, extremely low, and I also didn't see any of your posters at the show, got there very
Right.
early, like, they were not there. So are there instances where you're making special edition prints for an artist that are not actually sold at the venue?
Yeah, I have a couple clients that contract me to do posters for their events, and they're internal posters. So they make them as a gift for the bands and the crew that are working it. That Neil Young poster in particular was through Another Planet here, and I got very few posters from that. So my edition from that run was very small, and I think that's pretty much the only way you were able to get one of those posters is through me directly. So there was a very high demand. That poster was very expensive right out of the gate just because I had so few to sell. But yeah, that poster was extremely limited.
Yes, that's, like, my prized possession, so I was very thankful to get my hands on it.
Yeah.
What would make you turn down a commission? How often does that happen, and what would make you turn one down?
It doesn't happen very much anymore. Like I said in that example I said earlier, sometimes stylistically or aesthetically, it just doesn't fit something that I'm capable. It's just not something in my toolbox. And that has changed over the years as well. I mean, I remember, I don't know, years ago, Cottonmouth Kings asked me to do something, and it was this very insane clown posse adjacent type thing. And it was through a cannabis dispensary, and everything about it was not interesting to me. And I think I turned it down. I'm just like, I don't think I'm the right artist for this. Today, I would do it. I did an Insane Clown Posse poster a couple years ago, and I loved it. I was like, oh my God, this is such a fun thing to work on. Again, it's not something that I would generally listen to recreationally, but um, it was a really fun project to work on. People ask me this question a lot, like, what if you don't like the band? And I'm like, that doesn't really enter into it as long as there's not some sort of Me Too or political breaking point that would cause me to have reservations about doing it. I'll try to do just about anything these days. And I think I usually answer that question by like, no matter how much I dislike the sound of a band that I'm working for, doing that job is still infinitely better than going to a 9 to 5 job and sitting in a large cubicle farm with fluorescent lights over my head.
Yeah.
I set my own hours. I typically design in bed. It's a fairly relaxing environment. So even the worst day of doing this job is so much better than doing a regular job.
How are the price points set for a poster at a show, let's say? I've noticed there's quite a bit of variety from show to show, from artist to artist, from venue to venue. Yeah, I'm curious how the price is determined and subsequently roughly what the take home is for the artist, the venue, and the poster artist. And I know this is a run on question, and how that differs when you're selling directly online.
The price point for each poster is different in almost every scenario, but I'd say like the average price point across the entire industry is about $40. When I started 20 years ago, it was 20. So there's been a little bit of an increase, and that changes depending on what level that band is at and what kind of venue they're playing and so forth. If it's foil, the scarcity of that print, the number that are available, whether it's, 50 posters or 800, and the demand, all those things affect the price. I rarely sell myself anymore at shows. I usually hand it over. I do occasionally sometimes my payment comes from sales. So like I just did a poster for a band last month and we just split it 50-50 down the middle. They sold out both nights. It worked great. I work with a festival that does the same thing. Like after costs are recouped, we split it 50-50. And that changes from band to band too. Sometimes they'll get 30%, I'll get 50%, the venue will take 10%, some other middleman gets 10%. So again, it's all contextual in terms of post sales. Part of how I keep my costs down to the artist is that I get an addition of the run, usually called artist proofs. So whatever that percentage is, that's the amount of the addition that I hold back from my sales online or at music festivals or gallery shows or things like that. And I try to set the price at the same thing that they set it at their merch booth. But again, if scarcity and demand becomes an issue, that price can go up quickly. So when things start escalating on eBay or other collectors markets, then I'd be an idiot to not take advantage of that. I think a lot of artists aren't really known for their business savvy. And occasionally it's that kind of, I'm like Outside Lands a few years ago, the first year back from the pandemic, they did a Halloween edition. And I did a Halloween themed poster for it. It sold out at the festival the first day by like 7 p.m. I didn't have very many copies of it to sell. So when I listed it, it was initially like $150. And people were immediately flipping those and selling them on eBay. And I'm like, well, that's stupid. I'm going to sell them for $300 then. And I got in a few arguments on Reddit and Facebook over that practice. But because they're all limited edition, you have a very narrow opportunity to make that money. And sometimes they'll have staying power, but a lot of times it fades really quickly. Like some things do become historically landmark events, but for the most part, a month or two after that show's over, it's out of sight, out of mind. And you might get a couple sales here or there. Bob Weir died a couple weeks ago, and I got a spike in my Bob Weir posters, things like that. That's kind of how the prices are set. The poster community is also very tight, so we communicate with each other pretty often. So we occasionally just ask, like, what's the going rate for this? What's the going rate for that? How much would you charge for this? And luckily, everyone's really open and supportive of each other. So even though we're technically in direct competition, we all feel like we're family. So it's pretty easy to communicate with each other about these things.
You mentioned the topic of foil earlier, and I don't think I've ever seen any of your posters in a foil edition. Do you work with foil at all? And if not, why don't you?
I typically don't because it requires a special ink or bonding agent. And the use of foil variants and that stuff, when it first started, I wasn't a big fan of it because it seemed a little gimmicky to me. I think it kind of came out of the trading card industry, like Star Wars and Pokemon, things like that, where you'd have these chase cards and special foil editions and things like that. And a lot of times people were just doing limited variants, like only 10 or 15 prints, putting it on foil and then charging like 50 to 150% more than the normal price. As it's grown and people have started using different foils, people have started designing for it. And I think when you are conscious about your decisions and your design to accommodate a foil print, it makes a lot more sense to create that variant of the print. But just doing a normal poster, and especially when it's just like almost 100% coverage, so only the border of the poster ends up being foil, I don't think it makes a whole lot of sense. But yeah, I was a little critical of the foil game for a while. I've started using it a little bit more now. I just tested an additive from Speedball who makes the bulk of the ink that I use. So I started doing a couple foil prints recently. But yeah, I don't know. It's not a high priority of mine. I do use colored paper quite a bit, and I kind of did that at the beginning for economic reasons. Paper was cheaper than ink, so using a yellow paper was easier physically and cheaper than printing a gigantic field of yellow ink on white paper. And I think also at the beginning of my career, using a lot of negative space was an economic decision because I couldn't afford films. So I was just using an 8.5 by 11 printer and printing out overhead projector transparencies to use as my films. And that kind of defined my style early on.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I'm curious to know if the costs of your materials like ink or paper for that matter have increased significantly since you've started and more specifically if they've increased more recently with tariffs and inflation and whatnot.
Yeah, the cost has increased, and I will admit I am not very diligent about tracking my operating costs. But the pandemic, there was a couple issues. There was a big shortage of paper. The supply chain issue was very big. So there were a few, probably like 6 months, where I couldn't get the paper I usually print on. So I was using whatever I could find, basically. Sometimes it was much more expensive, nicer paper, and sometimes it was much worse. Yeah, the cost of paper has gone up a lot in the last few years. I haven't experienced any tariff related issues that I've noticed. That doesn't mean they're not there. But the problem I have had is that I used to have local suppliers that were very close here in San Francisco, and they've all closed down and moved away. My paper company is now in Palo Alto, which is about 45-minute drive in the best conditions. The place where I used to buy ink and other stuff, they moved to Chicago. So I have to really plan for this stuff now. Like if I do have a last minute job and I don't have that in stock, paper can take at least a day to get here if I'm out of stock. The ink's a little bit different because I could go to the local hardware store and pick up some house paint and use that. And sometimes I just use that anyway because it's easier and actually cheaper than using screen printing ink. But as far as I can tell, it has the same sort of archival properties. I printed with house paint for 20 years and I haven't seen any decomposition or fading or anything like that. It hasn't debonded off the paper or anything. So, yeah, I don't think that in particular hasn't changed why I've increased my prices. And I've also been blessed with like the one good landlord in San Francisco who's always rented my studio for very, very cheaply. He's never raised the price. So I have this kind of unicorn spot that has really allowed me to thrive. It helped me survive the pandemic when I didn't have any work. But yeah, I don't know. I should probably keep spreadsheets of expenses and all of those things, but I don't.
I'm curious to hear also about your, I guess, your strategy around test prints. That's another aspect of your business that I find interesting. So, for listeners who don't know, Tuffy sells test prints at around $100 a print, I believe. So, a bit of a premium, extremely
Yeah.
limited print runs because they're just test prints. And they feel like a true collector's item. What do the economics around the test prints look like? What does the demand look like for the test prints? And how did you start doing that? How did you think to do that?
There's a couple of us that have been doing different things with test prints for years. Let me explain what it is. So it's basically just a byproduct of the print process. So, when you do your first run of color on a piece of paper, you just make it through there to make sure that the screens burn correctly, that the colors match correctly, that the registration is on. Sometimes you'll just make a mistake. You'll have to clear the screen, whatever it is, but there's no thought or intention in it, so you just do it. I throw it on the floor. I forget about it. I'm doing another job like 2 weeks later. I have to do something. So it's just, you get multiple designs layered on top of each other with no planning, and they're not really treated. I mean, maybe other artists treat theirs tenderly, but mine typically have footprints, my dog print, something I spilled on it, things like that. And I think that all adds to the character of these things. And they're unreproducible, basically. Like, you can't go get those screens burned again and print it, because it's just happenstance, and there's just no rhyme or reason to why these things happen in the way they do. So eventually I'll just pick one up and I'll look at it, I'm like, well, that one's done, and I'll take a picture of it and put it online. And because it's a one of one print, like, I think it's more of like a fine art piece, even though it's technically trash. And I think it's very similar to, like, when people tear a bunch of wheat pasted posters off a wall and you have layers and layers of history of stuff there, that it's that same kind of feeling. You have this collage or hodgepodge of different things that work together. So I don't, the pricing of them, I think I originally sold them for $50 like 10 years ago. Now they're 100. And I try to put up one a week, but it usually ends up being 2 or 3 a month when I remember to do it. Sometimes they'll just sell immediately, and then sometimes they'll languish for like 2 years, and I'll eventually be like, well, this goes back in the pile. No one wants it. So it will get more layers on it. And then during the pandemic, just sitting around bored, I was like, you know what? I think there is a way to resell a test print that's already been sold. So I started making books just to compile them. And they were just iPhone photos, but they turn out fine. So I've just done like limited edition books of the various test prints I've done over the years. But yeah, it's just another thing that, like, this whole DIY mentality of like, how do you make something out of nothing? And the test print, which was, technically just supposed to be thrown away or recycled, just became a unique piece all on its own, and it gets its own life.
Yeah, it's a brilliant idea. Can you also really briefly explain what the printmaking process looks like for somebody that has no exposure to it, who's not artistic, never seen a press? I'm curious what that looks like.
So I'll design something on the computer, and say it's a three color design. I'll have 3 different layers. So pink, red, black is what I did recently. To get that from the computer to the screen, I print out the color transparency. It's like a film positive. So kind of like film photography, except instead of a negative, it's a positive. Next thing I do is I put that on a light table, and I put the screen on top of it. I expose the film onto a screen, and everything that's black or positive on the film, the light is blocked out. And when it's done exposing, when I hit it with water, everything that was black will wash out of the screen. So that's like the yellow on here. And then the green is blocked out. So when I run ink over it, it'll go through the yellow onto the screen, onto the paper. And you have to do that for each individual color, and set up, break it down, start over again. So that's the basic idea of it. Spray paint stencils are kind of another example of that makes sense to people. You do one color on the wall, then you do another one, and just build up over it.
Yeah, makes sense. Thank you. My dad will
Yeah.
really appreciate hearing the explanation. I'd love to switch gears and talk about the nonprofit work that you do. So if you'd like to tee up what that is, and yeah, what you're involved in, I'd love to hear it in your own words.
Yeah, so the poster industry, I mentioned earlier that the community is really tight, and that grew out of a website that's now defunct called gigposters.com. So in the, I don't know, probably around maybe the late 90s, even early 2000s, the site was there, and it was kind of a message board and image sharing platform for artists. And there were forums and people started talking, and the idea came to do a group show. And Frank Kozik, Chuck Sperry, Jay Ryan, and a few other people organized a show in San Francisco, just a couple blocks from where we are now. And I don't know, like 30 or 40 artists, maybe even more of that, came to that. And it was just this really amazing weekend where everyone got to meet each other in person and talk about, what they like about each other, and share stories and techniques and things like that. And people bought stuff. So from there, we continued that event South by Southwest, and then in Austin, and then Bumbershoot in Seattle. And they formed the American Poster Institute, which is now just called the Poster Institute because we've gone worldwide. And that was another DIY effort to start an organization to basically help us produce this event. So that was 2002. I've been involved for probably the last 10 years helping to produce the South by Southwest event and a few others. And then I took over as head about a year and a half ago. We maintained the status quo for a long time. And over the pandemic, we kind of decided that it was time to start pushing things a little bit more, try to expand. We changed the name to be more inclusive for our Mexican artists, European artists, British. We do events around the world. We have artists around the world. And I think there was some resentment about the American in the name, so we changed that. So we're a resource for artists, and mostly what we've done is produce events, and now we're trying to open up that more. We just launched a new website. We're working really hard to find corporate and educational partners to just help grow more and more, advocate for posters, do more gallery shows, do more than just our flat stock events. But yeah, it's run by artists in this community. Everyone's a volunteer. But I think as we try to get these partnerships, we're working on hiring more people to do publicity, to do business development, and things like that, and function as an actual organization rather than as, a ragtag DIY group of people doing stuff. So it's interesting, it's another almost full-time job on top of the one that I already have doing this. So it can be frustrating at times, but it benefits me and it benefits the rest of the artists in the community.
What's been the biggest surprise in working with the Poster Institute and working in a nonprofit setting?
Not getting paid. That's it's funny because, part of our ethos is to not do spec work, to not do work for free, like to not work for exposure, things like that. So, there's this contradiction in doing that and giving so much of your time to something for free. But I think there's payoffs and stuff like that as well. But it's also like a lot of like learning on the fly, which is I think what designers do a lot of time. You have to become all these other things that you aren't actually ever trained to do. So writing press releases and having business meetings and fake it till you make it type things. So it's interesting.
If you could go back and give yourself a single piece of advice, what would it be? Or alternatively, what advice would you give for aspiring poster artists today in today's world? Because I think the answer could differ for both of them.
Yeah, I get this question a lot. Sometimes I talk to students and other discussions about this, and there's two things. The first thing is that I didn't have faith to do this full time and myself to do this full time for a long time. So I was bartending and doing this, and the bar I was working at sold. And initially, I'd planned to come back when they reopened, but it took so long that it never did. So, or that I never went back. And that's the moment I'm like, oh, I could do this full time. I don't need this safety net. So, committing to yourself and having the confidence in yourself to actually make this your main thing, if this is what you want to do, instead of a side hustle or something that you do after work or on the weekends, I think it's important to realize when it's time to commit to that. And then the second thing, again, it's like the do as I say, not as I do aspect of things is to like take a business class or an accounting class. When I was in art school, there was nothing like that. There was nothing that taught us how to manage an art career and how to do all that stuff. There's a lot of not so fun things in running this. Yes, it's a super cool job, but I still have to pay taxes. I still have to navigate health insurance and things like that, whether to be an LLC or an S corp or all that stuff. It's that's the not sexy part of it, and it's something I wish I would have taken a long time ago. And the same thing with running the nonprofit. My dad was a college business professor, and I called him with questions about nonprofits. He's like, I don't know the answer to that. And then a couple of weeks later, I got a package in the mail, and I opened it up. And my dad had sent me Nonprofits for Dummies. And I'm like, well, I guess this is where I start. And I started reading these things. If you meet some lawyers, that's always helpful to have around too. We've been lucky. We've had a few that work with the nonprofit that have been helpful. Luckily, we've never had any sort of issue that we really needed a lawyer, but it's always nice to have someone review contracts. And the ability to chase down deadbeat clients is another important one, just to advocate for yourself and how to negotiate deals and things like that. It's just another nice thing about the community being so supportive is someone's like, how do I even do this? Like, I don't know how to quote this project that's been given to me. So don't be afraid to ask for help. That's another important thing. I'm pretty bad at that as well. So
Yeah, all very sound advice. I think we have time for one more question. Is there a white whale artist or venue for you that you have not worked with yet? Is there somebody out there that you're chasing?
I think that there was for a long time. I don't know. if I'm consciously aware of it anymore, but now there's like, I never thought Neil Young had never occurred to me as something that was even within the realm of possibility. But when I got that call and they're like, "Oh, would you be interested in this?" I was like, "Yeah," and then I feel like, "Holy shit, I'm doing a Neil Young poster." So yeah, I mean, there is stuff like that that's out there. I just don't realize it until it falls in my lap. Nick Cave, that was a big one. Willie Nelson, like, I've been really lucky to work from I'm like looking around my studio right now. Devo is over there. So I have gotten to work with some of my favorite artists, and luckily they've all been, pretty cool and pretty amazing projects.
Yeah, that's amazing. A very fulfilling career. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this today, Tuffy. I really, really appreciate it. I am such a big fan of your work. And if you want to share with listeners where they can find your work, please feel free to do so.
Yeah, liltuffy.com, which is with a hyphen in the middle, and lil_Tuffy on Instagram are probably the two biggest places where I share everything. I'm slowly working on a TikTok presence and learning how to be an influencer on top of everything else. But yeah, I'll be at South by Southwest in March, Tree Fort in Boise, Idaho at the end of March, Kilby Block Party in Salt Lake City end of May, and some other festivals as the year goes on.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure.
I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Make sure to follow or subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts so you can stay up to date with the latest episodes. Thanks for listening.